The story of Joseph, from dreams to destiny. Once upon a time, in a land called Canaan, there was a young boy named Joseph. Joseph was one of 12 brothers, and his father, Jacob, loved him very much. So much so that he gave Joseph a beautiful, colorful coat, one that made Joseph feel special. But Joseph's brothers didn't like this at all. They grew jealous because they thought their father loved Joseph more. Now Joseph was no ordinary boy. God had given him a special gift, the ability to dream dreams that held great meaning. One day, Joseph had a dream, and he couldn't wait to share it with his brothers. "Listen," Joseph said excitedly. "In my dream, we were tying bundles of grain in the field, and suddenly my bundle stood up, and all of your bundles bowed down to mine." His brothers frowned. "Do you think you'll be king over us? That we'll bow to you," they grumbled. They didn't like Joseph's dream one bit. But Joseph had another dream. He said, "I dreamed that the sun, the moon, and 11 stars were all bowing down to me." This made his brothers even angrier, and even his father Jacob was surprised. "What is this dream you've had? Will your mother, your brothers, and I bow down to you?" But deep down, Jacob wondered what God might be saying through Joseph's dreams. Joseph's journey into Egypt. One day, Jacob sent Joseph to check on his brothers who were tending their flocks. When his brothers saw Joseph coming from a distance, they said, "Here comes the dreamer. Let's get rid of him." But instead of hurting Joseph, they decided to sell him to traveling merchants, who took him far, far away to a place called Egypt. The brothers then dipped Joseph's colorful coat in animal blood and showed it to their father, tricking him into thinking Joseph had been killed by a wild animal. Poor Jacob cried for his son, not knowing Joseph was still alive. Joseph in Egypt. In Egypt, Joseph was sold as a servant to a man named Potiphar, who worked for Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. Joseph worked hard, and God blessed everything he did. Potiphar saw that Joseph was trustworthy and made him in charge of his entire house. But then something unfair happened. Potiphar's wife told a lie about Joseph, and he was thrown into prison, even though he had done nothing wrong. It seemed like Joseph's life was only getting worse. But even in prison, Joseph trusted God, worked hard, and soon the prison keeper put him in charge of the other prisoners. One day, 2 of Pharaoh's servants, the cupbearer and the baker, were thrown into prison. Both men had strange dreams, and they were upset because they didn't know what their dreams meant. Joseph said, "God can interpret dreams. Tell me what you dreamed." The cupbearer told Joseph his dream, and Joseph said, "In 3 days, Pharaoh will restore you to your position." And it happened just as Joseph said. But the baker's dream meant something sad. He would not live much longer. Joseph's words were true because they came from God. Before the cupbearer left prison, Joseph asked, "Please remember me when you're free and tell Pharaoh about me." But the cupbearer forgot all about Joseph for 2 whole years. Pharaoh's strange dreams. One night, Pharaoh had 2 strange dreams. In one, 7 fat cows were eaten by 7 skinny cows. In the other, 7 healthy stalks of grain were swallowed up by 7 thin, dried-out stalks. Pharaoh was very troubled. He asked all his wise men, but no one could explain the dreams. Then, the cupbearer remembered Joseph. "Pharaoh, when I was in prison, a man named Joseph told me the meaning of my dream, and it came true." Pharaoh sent for Joseph right away. When Joseph came before him, Pharaoh said, "I hear you can interpret dreams." Joseph replied humbly, "I can't, but God will give you the answer you need." Pharaoh told Joseph his dreams, and Joseph explained, "The dreams mean the same thing. Egypt will have 7 years of plenty, where food will grow in abundance. But after that, there will be 7 years of famine, where nothing will grow, and people will go hungry. God gave you these dreams to warn you so you can prepare." Pharaoh was amazed. He saw that God was with Joseph and made him the ruler over all of Egypt, second only to Pharaoh himself. Joseph was now in charge of storing food during the good years to save everyone during the famine. Joseph's brothers bowed down. When the famine came, people from all over traveled to Egypt to buy food, including Joseph's brothers. They didn't recognize him, but Joseph knew who they were. He tested them to see if their hearts had changed. After many events, Joseph revealed himself to them. "I am Joseph, your brother," he said. His brothers were shocked and afraid, but Joseph forgave them. He said, "Don't be afraid. What you meant for evil, God used for good, to save many lives." Joseph brought his father, Jacob, and his entire family to live in Egypt, where they had plenty of food and were safe. Lessons for us. Joseph's story teaches us 2 important lessons. Trust God's plans, even when life is hard. Joseph obeyed God and stayed faithful, even in difficult times. In the end, God used Joseph to save many people. Reverence and obedience to God bring blessings. Joseph always pointed to God as the source of his wisdom, showing respect and obedience to God's ways. No matter what happens, if we trust and obey God, He will take care of us and work everything for good. And so, Joseph the dreamer became the leader who saved many lives, all because he stayed close to God. Please do not forget to like this video and subscribe to this channel. This would help YouTube spread this video to many others. And whenever we make videos, you would be the first to receive. Press that button now. Share to families who have kids too. Do it now. Thank you. The story of David, chosen by God. Once upon a time, in a little town called Bethlehem, there was a man named Jesse who had 8 sons. Now, Jesse's youngest son, David, was a shepherd boy who spent his days out in the fields, taking care of his father's sheep. But little did anyone know that something amazing was about to happen to David, something that would change his life forever. One day, God spoke to the prophet Samuel, saying, "Samuel, go to Jesse's house in Bethlehem. I have chosen one of his sons to be the next king of Israel." You see, God had rejected Saul, the current king, because Saul didn't obey him. And now God wanted a new king, someone whose heart loved him truly. So Samuel, the prophet, took his horn of oil, used for anointing, and traveled to Bethlehem. When Samuel arrived at Jesse's house, he told Jesse to bring out his sons, because God was going to choose a king from among them. Imagine how exciting that must have been. Jesse quickly called for his sons, 7 tall, strong, and handsome young men. The first son, Eliab, stepped forward. He was tall and strong, and Samuel thought, "Surely this is the one the Lord has chosen." But God said to Samuel, "Do not look at his appearance or his height, for I have rejected him. Man looks at the outward appearance, but I look at the heart." So Samuel looked at the next son, and the next one, and the next one, 7 sons in total. And with each one, God said no. Samuel was confused. He turned to Jesse and asked, "Are these all of your sons?" Jesse paused. He seemed to almost forget. "Well, there's still the youngest, David," Jesse said. "But he's out in the fields, taking care of the sheep." You see, David was so young and unimportant in their eyes that they didn't even think to call him. His own father and brothers overlooked him. But guess what? God hadn't forgotten David. Samuel said, "Send for him. We will not sit down until he comes." So someone ran to the fields to fetch David. And soon David appeared. His face was glowing, and he had a kind and brave heart. He wasn't the tallest, the strongest, or the oldest. But God looked at David's heart, and he saw someone who loved him and would follow him. Then God spoke to Samuel, "This is the one. Rise and anoint him, for he is chosen." Samuel took the horn of oil, and right there, in front of David's brothers and family, he poured the oil on David's head and anointed him to be king. At that moment, God's Spirit came powerfully upon David, and though he was still just a shepherd boy, God had a special plan for him. Children, do you see? Sometimes people might overlook you. They might not think you're the smartest, the strongest, or the best. But God sees your heart, and He has a plan for you, just like He did for David. Even when others ignore you, remember, God can choose you. And so, David went back to taking care of his sheep, but he knew something amazing. He was chosen by God to be king one day. God had seen his heart, and God sees yours too.